Middletown Christian Church was planted 182 years ago. What do I see? I see a church that's been shining brightly for generations. You know what else I see? I see a church that's been marked by the power and the presence of God. People's lives have been changed by the love of God through the ministry of this church. And it's been a privilege to see and to hear those stories of real life change. Today I want to talk about something else I see. The church I see is feeding hungry people. Physical hunger, meeting those needs. Look around you, there's so much hunger in our world. All kinds of physical needs that people have that need to be met. And I see our church feeding hungry people. But I also see the church feeding spiritually hungry people. Because everywhere you look are people who are empty, lonely, afraid, scared. This is a hard world to live in, to be alone. And we know that Jesus Christ is the bread of life, and He answers our deepest spiritual needs. And we've been called to be the people that bring that message of good news to touch people's hearts. There's a great story. And in this story, it's told in all 4 Gospels. It's the story of the feeding of the 5,000. What's remarkable is that there's only 2 stories that are told in all 4 of the Gospels. One is the feeding of the 5,000, and the other is the resurrection story. So it must mean that this story is pretty important. Well, one day, Jesus is tired and exhausted and grieving the loss of John the Baptist, who was beheaded. His disciples were exhausted too because they'd been on mission for a long time and away from home. So Jesus took him away to a remote place on a hillside. But the crowds followed him there. And like Jesus does, He began to meet needs, He began to heal the sick, He began to teach them. And it says that when He looked out on the crowds, He saw them as sheep without a shepherd. And it said He had compassion for them. Well, as time went on and the hour became late, the disciples became concerned they didn't have enough to eat, these crowds. There was more than 5,000 people, including women and children. So it said, Jesus, would you send them away so they can go get something to eat? We don't have enough food. And then Jesus looked at them and gave them this challenge. You give them something to eat. Well, how can we feed them, Jesus? We don't have enough to feed. It would take everything we have and more and then some. And Jesus said, well, what do you have? And the disciples said, well, we got 2 fish. We got 5 loaves of bread. And Jesus said, let me have it. So they gave it to Jesus. He blessed it and multiplied it and fed all 5,000 people, including the women and children. There were probably 15,000 people in all with 5 loaves of bread and with just two fish. And it says there was enough left over for everyone, baskets left over, and everyone was satisfied with that meal. When I think about that and think about us feeding hungry people, I think there's some lessons there for us. The first lesson is Jesus is messy. I mean, if you're going to follow Jesus, you're going to end up in some messy places and some messy situations where you're going to have God's help to figure it out. This is a messy world, and Jesus is going to call you out of the nice, clean church we live in into a world filled with mess and all kinds of stuff, and your hands and feet are going to get dirty. That's what it means to embrace people where they are. The other thing in this story is you're going to have to get some new eyes, because it said that Jesus looked at the people and had compassion on them. He saw hungry people with needs. All the disciples saw were problems they needed to send away. And so if we're going to follow Jesus and feed hungry people, we're going to have to get His eyes. We're going to have to start looking at people differently. We're going to have to ask Him to touch our eyes and help us see the world in a new way, to feel what they feel, to put ourselves in their shoes, to understand their situations, to not judge or to condemn them. The other thing is, Jesus doesn't want us just to see people. He wants to meet those needs. He says, give them something to eat. He could have fed them Himself, but instead He chose to use them. And that's how He does it in the world. Sometimes people will say, where's God in the world? Why isn't God doing something about it? Well, the question isn't where is God? The question is, where is the church? Because God has called us to meet real needs and to feed hungry people, because we are His hands and His feet. The other is limited resources. Disciples, like all of us, say, well, what can we do? We don't have enough. And He's not worried about what we don't have. We have enough. All He wants us to do is to offer the little we have and to trust Him to multiply it. And it's amazing what He can do when we offer it to Him. In fact, just this Thanksgiving, we're going to feed over 300 families. That's a lot of families to feed. That's probably 800 or 900 people. How can we do it? Well, each family in our church takes a little basket or a little bag home, fills it up with groceries, brings it back the next Sunday. Next thing you know, the whole foyer is filled with more than 300 bags. I added it up the other day. We've been doing it for at least 15 years, collecting over 300 bags of groceries for Thanksgiving meals for families. Do you know how many families that is over 15 years? 4,500 families. That's 7,000 or 8,000 or 9,000 people. Sounds like a feeding of the 5,000 to me. We can do more than we think we can if we just offer the little that we have. And the final thing is an expanded vision. We are capable of much more than we could ever dream or imagine. And when Jesus calls us to feed the world and to meet needs, He expands our vision for what is possible. On my own, I'm not enough, but together we're enough. Together we're enough. And we have Jesus with us to meet these needs. So church, this is our time. We're on that hill. We're called to teach. We're called to heal the sick. We're called to have eyes of compassion. And we're called to feed hungry people. Bob Goff said this. He said, God says to ordinary people, why are you bowing your head to me and praying with your eyes closed? Instead, I want you to open your eyes and look around and see the world and see human needs. And instead of bowing your head and closing your eyes, why not just bow your whole life to me and serve? That's the church I see. A church bowing its whole life before Him, feeding hungry people.